People-pleasing is not about being too nice. That framing, the one you've probably encountered everywhere, in articles, in therapy, in the comment sections of videos exactly like this one, is the reason most explanations of this pattern don't actually help. Because when you diagnose the wrong problem, the solutions feel right and change nothing. And if you've already tried the solutions, the scripts, the boundary-setting advice, the firm decision to finally just say no, and you are still here, still doing the thing, still watching yourself agree to something before you've even had time to think, that is not a failure of effort. That is what happens when the map doesn't match the territory. This video is about the territory, what the Fawn response actually is, where it actually comes from, and why understanding that the real version, not the shorthand, changes something that willpower never could. Here is the version of this you've probably heard. You people please because you're too nice, or because you're conflict avoidant, or because you lack confidence, or self-worth, or the willingness to prioritize yourself. And so the solutions that follow from that diagnosis make a certain kind of sense. Be more assertive, say no more often, value yourself enough to stop overgiving. Here are 12 phrases you can use next time. Here's the thing, nobody explains about that. If the pattern were actually about niceness, if it were a preference, a style, a habit you developed, then deciding to change it would work. People change habits, people update preferences, people hear a better strategy and implement it. But that is probably not what has happened for you. What has more likely happened is this. You understood the pattern intellectually. You made a genuine decision to do something different. You may have even practiced the new response. And then the moment arrived, someone asked something of you, and before you'd had time to consult yourself at all, you'd already said yes. And then came the silence after, the familiar dread, the recognition that it happened again. That is not a discipline problem. That is not a self-worth problem, at least not in the way the diagnosis usually means. That is a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. And training is different from habit. Training runs deeper. Training doesn't respond to a decision. To understand why, it helps to go back to something most people learned only halfway. Most people have heard of 3 survival responses: fight, confront the threat, flight, escape the threat, freeze, become invisible to the threat. What gets left out of most of that conversation is that there is a 4th, the Fawn response: appease the threat, make yourself useful to it, manage its emotional state before it becomes dangerous. Become so agreeable, so helpful, so easy to be around that the threat has no reason to activate. This is not a metaphor. This is a survival strategy, as neurologically legitimate as running or fighting, that the nervous system selects when the other options aren't available. When you can't fight because the threat is someone you depend on. When you can't flee because you're a child, or because leaving would cost everything. When freezing isn't enough, because the threat requires active management. In those conditions, the nervous system finds the option that keeps you safest. And for a significant number of people, particularly those who grew up in environments where someone's mood determined the emotional weather of the entire household, that option was Fawn. Research on trauma responses, including the work that first named Fawn as a distinct category, consistently points to the same origin: an environment where your safety, emotional safety, sometimes physical safety, depended on your ability to read another person and respond to what they needed before they had to ask. You became extraordinarily good at that: the attunement, the scanning, the ability to walk into a room and know within seconds what the emotional temperature is, who needs managing, what is about to go wrong, and exactly how to position yourself to prevent it. That is not a flaw. That is a skill that developed in response to a real and specific demand. And here is the reframe that changes everything. You were right. In the environment you were actually in, fawning was the accurate response. It kept something safe. It worked. The problem is not that you developed it. The problem is that your nervous system is still running it in environments where the original threat no longer exists, with people who are not actually dangerous, in situations where you have options your younger self did not. Your nervous system did not get the memo that the environment changed. It is still doing the job it was trained to do. Here is the distinction that carries the most weight. A habit can be changed by deciding differently. You identify the behavior, you choose a different response, and over time, with enough repetition, the new response becomes automatic. A survival response does not work that way. A survival response is not stored where decisions live. It lives in the part of the nervous system that operates below conscious awareness, the part that was running the calculation long before your thinking mind was even involved. That is why the freeze before the yes happens the way it does, not as a choice, not as a failure of resolve, as a body responding to a signal that something like danger might be near and executing the response it knows. You are not slow. You are not weak. You are not someone who will never change. You are someone whose nervous system classified people-pleasing as a survival behavior. And survival behaviors do not stand down because you decided they should. This is where the framing of too nice does the most damage. Because if the problem is niceness, the solution is hardness. And the people who need this most are not people who need to become harder. They are people who need to understand that the thing running underneath the niceness, the vigilance, the scanning, the preemptive compliance, is not their personality. It is a layer that formed over their personality, the self underneath it, the one with preferences and opinions and desires, the one who existed before the environment required this adaptation. That self did not disappear. It went somewhere safe while this was happening. And that is the thing that changes when you understand what the fawn response actually is. You stop looking for what's wrong with you, you start looking for what happened to you. Those are different investigations, they lead to different places, not a flaw. An adaptation. And adaptations, unlike character flaws, can be worked with, not by deciding harder, by understanding the nervous system well enough to begin, slowly, to update it. If this is the explanation you've been looking for, the one you want somewhere you can return to, there's a field guide in the description that goes deeper into exactly this. The mechanism, the activation patterns, and how to begin recognizing the moment the fawn response fires before the yes is already out of your mouth. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So with that said, the question that usually follows this explanation is, what do I actually do with it? And the honest answer, the one that respects how this actually works, is that the starting point is not behavioral. Not yet. The starting point is perceptual. There is a moment just before the automatic yes where something in the body registers the incoming demand. Something goes still. There may be a tightening, chest, jaw, shoulders, a kind of bracing. The system is running the calculation. What does this person need? What response will keep this safe? How do I position myself? Most people in this pattern have spent years moving through that moment so fast, they're already into the response before they've registered the signal. The first thing, not the only thing, but the first thing, is to learn to feel that moment. Not to stop it. Not yet. Just to feel it. To notice, something just happened in my body. My nervous system just fired. I am in the freeze before the yes. That noticing is not nothing. It is the beginning of the space between the signal and the response. And that space, however small it starts, is where everything else eventually becomes possible. You are not trying to become someone who never fawns overnight. You are trying to become someone who can feel it when it happens. That is achievable. That is the actual starting point. And anyone who has been in this pattern long enough to be exhausted by it knows that an achievable starting point is more useful than a transformation that lives only in a decision. This is not the Instagram version of healing. This is what it actually looks like. Slower than you want, more specific than the advice usually is, and grounded in understanding your nervous system rather than overriding it. If you want the mechanism laid out somewhere you can return to, including what activation actually feels like in the body and how to begin catching it in real time. The field guide in the description was built for exactly this moment. Link is there and in the pinned comment. What was the moment you first realized this pattern had a name? And what shifted when it did? Here is what this comes back to. You didn't develop this pattern because something was wrong with you. You developed it because something was required of you, in an environment where the people with power over your safety needed managing, and your nervous system found the strategy that made the most sense given what you were working with. That strategy worked. It kept something safe. And the part of you that deployed it was not weak. It was precise. What has happened since is not that the strategy failed. It's that it outlived the environment it was built for and became the default response to every environment, including ones where you are not in danger, including relationships where the other person is not going to withdraw their care if you disappoint them. Your nervous system doesn't know that yet, but you do. And that gap between what the nervous system believes and what you now understand is where the work lives, not in a firmer decision, not in a better script, in the slow, patient, unglamorous process of showing your nervous system that the threat it has been managing is no longer the size it was. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from understanding. And understanding, real understanding, the kind that makes the past make sense and locates the problem where it actually lives, is not a small thing. It is the difference between fighting yourself and working with yourself. Not a flaw, an adaptation. And now you know what you're actually working with.